Okay, we are on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph 22a. And the Gemara is discussing the Mishnah. What Rabbi Yeshua said, certain people that are considered Mivala Olam, they lay waste to the world, they destroy the world. Mm-hmm. And they are the pious fool. He's pious, but he uses it in a foolish way. We explained that is at length. And then there's the cunning wicked one, not just an ordinary person who's wicked, not just a regular Rasha, but he's cunning in his wickedness, pretending to be holy, but really not, as we explained at length. Then there was Isha Prusha, a woman who behaves celibacy, tries to refrain from intimacy. In this effort to be pious, this is a big mistake. Have a healthy, intimate relationship with your husband in a proper way, and in a holy way, in a good way, and that's the way it should be, as opposed to pretending to be pious by practicing celibacy. That's what the Mishnah said. And then there was another one in the Mishnah, right? There was Isha Prusha. Oh, and the one who publicly self-effaces himself to try to show off his humility, but really he's not so humble deep down. So that I think we'll get to later. Okay, so the Gemara discusses now Isha Prusha, the woman who takes on celibacy. This is the big mistake. So says the Gemara in elaboration of this idea. Before I start, I just want to make mention that today, the 24th of Tevis, is the Yartzeit, the anniversary of the passing of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, founder of Chabad. We've had a number of occasions to quote him, of course, and we talked about his life a little bit as well. We're not going to do that now. But in honor of his Yartzeit, I will share a teaching of his from Tanya, which will help us understand a line in today's Gemara. So let's see. Tana Rabbanan, our sages taught, this is a Mishnaic age text. Bisula, Silinus, I'm not sure how you pronounce the word. Silinus, a woman, let me see how they put the vowels over here. Hold on. Silionis, something like that. Okay, a woman who, a psula means a maiden, a virgin, literally a virgin, means an unmarried woman, a single girl who davens too much. Daven prays too much. No, let's see. Let's see. So psula tzailonis, a virgin, a maiden, a young girl who excessively prays. Valmona, shayvevis, and a widow who is very friendly with all of her neighbors, constantly going to visit everybody. She's what they call in Yiddish a yente. A yente in Yiddish. And someone who is a chatterbox. A yente is someone who's a chatterbox. She goes from neighbor to neighbor, chatting here, chatting there. So, and that's number two. So number one is the woman who, the single girl who prays too much, and the widow who's bouncing from neighbor to neighbor too much. The katan and a child, a child who hasn't completed his months yet, literally he hasn't reached his months. So usually this expression katan shaloi kololei chadashav, a child who hasn't reached his months yet, is usually referring to a premature baby, a baby that's born early, means didn't finish his months of pregnancy. But the Gemara is going to explain that we're talking about something else. So a child born prematurely? That's usually what this phrase is used for. But we're going to see soon that's not what we're talking about here. The Gemara is going to explain what we mean. We're using this expression to describe someone else. No, literal, usually it's used in that expression. A woman, a girl, a child is born early is katan shalei, good morning. A katan shalei kololei chadashav. But we're going to learn soon that that's not what the Gemara means. Okay, so psula, a single girl who davens too much, prays too much, a widow who's bouncing from home to home, chatting too much, and this someone who's premature, let's just put it that way, we'll learn who he is soon. These people lay waste to the world. 21a. There should be a Gemara there on the shelf, there's none? 22a. 22 a.m., sorry. So somebody took it back to the library then.
Puts it back in the.
Send it back in the library if it's not here. Okay, so these three people lay waste to the world. And as Rashi says, because these people are just witchcrafters and they're just they're really neophytes, means they're promiscuous, but they put on this show of being all holy when really they're not.
Yeah.
So let's see.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The Gemara says, Amy, is this the case? Is it the case that the single girl who's not praying and a widowed woman who goes walking is so bad? Is that the case? But Rabbi Yochanan said, Lamadnu, we learned Yiras Chet, fear of sin, Mipsula, from a single girl. That's the model of someone who teaches us fear of sin. Exactly the opposite of what we just learned. We just learned that she's part of those who will lay waste to the world. And here we're learning that this single girl is teaching us what it means to fear of heaven. And likewise, Kibul Sachar Malmana, we learned what it means to receive reward from a widow. So what are you telling me? That a widow who is going from neighbor to neighbor, she's the waste of the world. Where here we learn that a widow teaches us how to reap reward. So exactly the opposite. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yochanan explains, how do we learn fear of sin from a single girl? Rabbi Yochanan Shamya, because Rabbi Yochanan once overheard Lahi Psula, to this young girl, the single girl. Rabbi Yochanan overheard her saying the following: the Naflal Appa, she fell on her face. The Ka'amran, she was saying in prayer, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe. Barasa Gan Eden, you created Gan Eden, you created the Garden of Eden, you created paradise. Barasa Gehenim, you created hell. Barasa Tzadikim, you created righteous. Because Rashi says these are the righteous that inherit paradise. Gan Eden. Ubarasa Rashayim, you created wicked. You created these people, different extremes. Says this girl. May be the will before you, God. She continues. That people should not have their downfall because of me. A single girl, maybe she looks good, and cause others to have ideas and thoughts. She doesn't want to be the catalyst for somebody else's sin. So it says Rabbi Yochanan, having heard this, so I learned what it means to be fear of sin. Here's a single girl who's aware of the effect she has on men, and praise to Hashem, please, no one should falter because of me. So what are you telling me earlier? That a single girl who prays is one of the people who bring waste and lay waste to the world? What's going on? Contradiction. Gemara says further, as far as Kibul Sachar Memalmana, as for the statement that Rabbi Yochanan said, that we learned what it means to receive reward from a widow. So explains the Gemara. Another incident with Rabbi Yochanan. Dahi Almana, there was this widow. There was a shul, a synagogue in her neighborhood, but Kol Yoma, every day, every day she would take a longer walk, a farther walk, and she would go daven, she would go pray at the base medrash, the study hall of Rabbi Yochanan. So Amar Allah, Rabbi Yochanan tells this widow, Biti, my daughter, is there not a synagogue in your neighborhood? I have to walk all the way to me, to my synagogue? Amrale, so the widow said back to him, Rabbi, my teacher, don't I have more merit for walking a greater distance? So here Rabbi Yochanan is learning what it means to get reward from a widow and learning what it means to have fear of sin from a single girl. So why would the Mishnah then say, why would this Mishnaic text say that a psula, a single girl who daven, who prays too much, and the widow who goes around, she's the laying waste to the world? We see widows and single girls are to be held in high esteem. And it makes sense. I mean, a widow living alone, maybe she has children to look after alone. the effort she needs to put in to serving Hashem is much greater. So, which is kind of what you're saying, don't I have the reward for walking? So it could be, literally, the Gemara means literally the distance of walking on the ground it takes to get to the shul. But perhaps it also means more, the emotional fortitude it takes for her to muster up the courage to go to shul, to actually daven, even though she lost her husband. That itself, all that courage to move forward, even though she's a widow. There's what to learn from here. There's great reward in this from a woman like that. And likewise, a single girl who's alone, she's not married, but behaves properly. She's still a psula, she's still a virgin. She's praying, she's staying properly, she's praying. And he, like Rabbi described it, she's davening to Hashem that she shouldn't be the catalyst for men's sin. This is something to be admired. So why then would the Mishnah say that these are the people that lay waste to the world?
It seems like there's, in this case, she's davening in a study hall. I don't know if that was the appropriate place for her to study.
It seems it was a good thing for her. As long as there's a women's section, I don't know. I suppose as long as there's a women's section.
And it says he's asking her of a synagogue. But if there were a synagogue in her vicinity, I think that would be more appropriate.
Rabbi Yochanan seems to be admiring the fact that she walked farther, right?
Just pointing that out.
Yeah.
Seems
It is interesting that
between
it's,
study hall and synagogue.
yeah, that is interesting. That is interesting. Synagogue, that's interesting. We have to put thought into that. That's a good point.
I don't think women were in the study hall. I know, especially in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. But Rabbi Yochanan seems to admire it. I don't know.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's other ways to look at it. I'm just
Yeah,
pointing
no,
out
it's a good
that
point. It's interesting. So let's think about that. Let's think about that for a second.
the language is not comparing apples and apples, it's comparing study hall
Yeah.
and synagogue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if we have to think about that. That's a good point. At any rate, so says the Gemara like this. So now, when the Gemara answers the question and differentiates between the type of women that Rabbi Yochanan is talking about, which are praiseworthy, versus the type of women that the Mishnah is talking about, which are not, they lay waste to the world. The Gemara only addresses, at least the way Rashi writes it, only addresses the issue of the widow. Does not address the issue of the single girl. So we're going to have to address that ourselves. Let's see. Says the Gemara. Where am I? Oh, Kika Amar. When did our Mishnah say that a widow and a single girl lay waste to the world? Going, for example, Yochani Basar TV. This woman named Yochani Basar TV. Rashi tells us who she is. Who's Yochani Basar TV? The Gemara says, Rashi says like this. She was a widow, and she knew witchcraft. Witchcraft, machashefa. So what would she do when there were women who were about to give birth? She would do her witchcraft and prolongate the labor and hold off the birth. And then she would come to the house and be the heroine. She would come and pray, whatever she would do. And then she would go and undo whatever witchcraft it is. And then the woman gave birth. And everybody would think, oh, look at this tzaddikas, look at this righteous woman who's helping women give birth, ending the suffering. Yeah, ending the suffering of these women. But in reality, she's doing witchcraft. One day she was exposed by someone who worked in her house, who overheard noise.
Where do you see that though? It's not in here.
It's in Rashi.
Oh,
Rashi describes this. What is
I'm just looking at the English part.
what does that say?
It said just the beginning parts about
Yeah.
she engaged in sorcery, but that's
Sorcerer doesn't say what she did.
say what she did or how.
Yeah, Rashi goes through a whole detailed exposition. And one day she was one of her maidservants overheard noise in one of the vessels, and she opened it up, and the noise things fell out, and then the girl gave birth. So and they found out who she was exposed. So this is the kind of person we're talking about who lay waste to the world, because outwardly she's showing off that she's major righteous, but in reality it's sorcery, it's idol worship, as you mentioned. It's something equivalent to idol worship. Okay, But the Gemara doesn't address the issue of the single girl who prays. So had we not had Rashi, and the Gemara said, all the Gemara said was, for example, when the Mishnah talks negatively of women, it's talking about Yochini Basar TV. So we would say that Yochini Basar TV is a type of woman, and this is whether it's single or whether she's a widow, a sorcerer. But Rashi says we're talking about specifically a widow. So perhaps it goes something like this. And we have to think about Rabbi Yochanan's case when he saw the woman who was praying, asking Hashem that no man falter because of her, right? So this is a girl who's davening. She's single, so obviously she wants and should want men to see her, because that's what she'll get married, right? But at the same time, what's she davening to Hashem? What's she asking for? First of all, she's not davening because she wants the men to see what kind of pious girl she is. Right? Sometimes a person can daven because they want people to see her. They're praying too much because they want people to see her. So there's the possibility of a single girl who's praying because she wants a certain type of guy to see her. What's this girl's prayer as Rabbi Yochanan sees it? Exact opposite. They should see me, but they shouldn't, God forbid, falter. They shouldn't, God forbid, stumble because of me. Right? So her davening is not to show off, not even to get married. She's not davening, please have Hashem, let me, I want to find a good husband. She's davening that she should be less seen, not more seen. Or she should be seen in a insidious way. She should be seen in a modest way. Right? So her prayer itself was a catalyst for her modesty, as opposed to someone whose prayer is a means to draw attention itself. Right? And that's maybe now that we're thinking about it, maybe the same thing with this woman. What do you think, Robert?
I'm thinking, how are these cases going to prove a general notion that if they see a woman doing this, another woman wouldn't be doing the exact opposite?
Right.
I mean,
It's circumstantial.
You can't pigeonhole one person's behavior to expand to, because this may be the exception to the rule.
But what's interesting though is that both women in this case are women who are not married. They're alone.
Yeah.
Maybe both of them want to get married. But what's the manner in which they want to get married? So maybe that's why the widow is going to the study hall. She's the effort she's putting in to make sure that even as a widow, and maybe she wants to get remarried, but she wants to get remarried to someone who goes to the study hall. She wants to get remarried to someone who's learning from Rabbi Yochanan.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the single girl. She's davening for someone who's looking at her with modesty, not the other way around. So maybe that's
to refute the initial premise.
That's right.
These people are stumblers for the world.
Right, but the point is that I think the point is, in other words, a woman who's married and she's with her husband, okay, she's set in life and she's set in life, she's in a healthy position, a healthy relationship, and she's good, right? But when there's potential for a relationship, it can go either way. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the issue here.
That they're trying to make is
Yeah.
you can't just prove outright that these women have some malicious intent. There is another side to it. That here are some examples that women are biased and really want the good.
That's right. So, but the danger maybe is that women like this, because they're like going back to the Gemara said earlier, that a woman wants to have intimacy, so she'll use externalities of piety to gain attention, like this woman doing witchcraftery, behaving as if she was a whole thing, or the single girl who's davening all day because she wants people to notice her. Right? That's perhaps what's going on here, as opposed to properly looking for a spouse. The single girl who's the virgin, the single girl davening, no one should look at her immodestly, and that's the kind of husband she wants. And the widow going to the study house. This is the kind of guy I want.
So is the Gemara perhaps trying to create indicators for us to know
Perhaps, yeah.
how we should.
When you're looking for a
distinguish
spouse, know what to look for.
between a woman who is truly pious or a woman who is
It's
somewhat
feigning
pious,
piety because he wants your attention.
and this is how you do it. This may be
Yeah,
the indicators that
Yeah.
are being used.
Yeah. So,
Because otherwise
yeah.
they're just
So
one
perhaps
woman
in both
doing
cases,
this,
that's
one
right.
woman
So
doing
maybe the
this.
marker is in both cases, they're pushing themselves. In other words, the woman who's going to the base meadow, she puts a lot of effort to get there. Right?
Not easy to walk, whatever.
Right. And the girl who's praying, her prayer itself indicates her own self-effacement type of thing. So there's a true humility here as opposed to external feigning piety. Maybe that's an indicator of what kind of girl you should be looking for, whether you're in the category we're looking for widows or you're the category we're looking for a single girl who's ever been married before, whichever one you happen to be. Maybe, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I want to share with you a teaching from the Alter Rebbe, which will help us shed light on one of the lines of the Gemoro here. So the Gemoro said, the single girl's prayer was, Master of the universe, you created Gan Eden, you created paradise, you created hell, you created righteous, you created wicked. May it be your will that no one falter as a result of me. And no one sin because of me. So there's two questions to start with. First of all, why the introduction? You created righteous, you created wicked. Just say, may it be your will that no one falter. I'm a good-looking girl. No one should sin because of me. Why the introduction? You created wicked, you created righteous. What's the deal with that? And moreover, this is a question that actually Tanya addresses directly, not on this Gemara, but the Gemara elsewhere, but Basra, which says that Eov says to God, God, you created righteous and you created wicked. So Tanya asks, what do you mean you created righteous, you created wicked? The Gemara famously says, everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven, right? If a person is born tall, short, rich, wealthy, wealthy or the opposite, or whatever talents or things a person has, it's all in God's hand. But how you behave, righteous or wicked, this isn't your free choice. Right? Rambam famously writes, every person could choose to be like Moshe Rabbeinu or to be the opposite, God forbid. So what does this mean? You created righteous, created wicked? What kind of statement is this? Asked the Alter Rebbe in chapter 1 of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe answers it in chapter 14 and 27.
14
and 27. Or 28, one of those two chapters. The question of God you created righteous is in chapter 14. And the answer to the question, God you created wicked, that's in chapter 27, I believe, maybe 28. And the gist of the answer is as follows. The Alter Rebbe explains at length.
The difference between 14 and 27 is 13.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the Alter Rebbe explains at length the classes of the tzaddik, the Rasha, and the Beinoni. And he explains the question of tzaddik, Rasha, and Beinoni in halacha, in Jewish law, is a question of behavior. And that's what Rambam's talking about when he says every Jew can be like Moshe Rabbeinu. In behavior, following what the Code of Jewish law says. But when we talk about tzaddik and Rasha and Beinoni in its true sense, explains the Alter Rebbe, it's not a question of behavior. It's a question of what's going on inside of his heart. What does that mean? It means like this. A tzaddik isn't someone who simply does everything it says in the Code of Jewish law and never sins. But a tzaddik is someone who doesn't even want to sin. And that's not the average person. It's not the average person. On the contrary, chapter 27, Alter Rebbe famously says, we say it every day in Shema. We say in the third paragraph of Shema, do not follow your eyes and heart. So what is the pasuk indicating when it says do not follow your eyes and heart? The pasuk is indicating that you're going to have eyes that see things and you're going to have a heart that wants things. So the Torah is not expecting you not to want sin. The Torah says you're going to want sin, but don't follow it anyway. Because that's the average person. That's the Beinoni. Beinoni, not just meaning middle, but Beinoni perhaps meaning average. What's the average person expected? To get to a point where he doesn't want to sin? That's not the expectation. So the day you die, you're going to want to sin. What you're expected to do is to control yourself. Don't follow your heart. Your heart may want it, and that's fine. Torah doesn't say, v'lo yeh lechem leiv, to want sin. You shouldn't have a heart to want sin. No, you'll have eyes that will see sin, and you're going to want sin, but don't do it anyway. Lo yisasuru, don't follow it. That's what the expectation of the average person is. Whereas the tzaddik is someone who gets to a point where he doesn't even want to sin. And then the wicked is someone who actually gives in to sin. So based on this explains the Alter Rebbe. And when the pasuk says you created tzaddik, because to get to a point where a person doesn't want to sin is not something. He says, "Like kol kach mishpat habchira." It's not so easily in your free choice to decide, I don't want to sin anymore. It takes a lot of work, and in most cases, actually a gift from heaven. A person serves Hashem long enough, he's granted the gift that he's elevated to the level of tzaddik where he doesn't want to sin. That's not for most people. Most people live their whole lives, and until the day they die, they want to sin, but they control themselves, or they, to the best of their ability, to control themselves. Right? So says Tanya, Baras tzaddikim, you created tzaddikim because you created such a category of people who can get to the point where they don't even want to sin anymore. And Baras Rashayim, you created other people who have the capacity to sin, but they got to control themselves. And that's perhaps what this girl is saying. You, Hashem, created tzaddikim. Okay, so you created some people who will look at me and don't even want anything. Okay, so they're going to go to Gan Eden, good for them. But you also created people who, not for no fault of their own, they're going to look at me and want. That's what she's saying. In other words, she's talking to Hashem and saying, it's you who created people with this nature. I'm not putting the blame on the guy who sees me. But you created people like that. But tzaddikim, you created some people who are tzaddikim who don't even want sin. Okay, so that's how you created them. But you created other people who do want sin. So please, Hashem, they shouldn't falter because of me. But it's not like I'm blaming them. You made them this way. You made people that are like that. And they have to work very hard to control themselves. And you know that. So please, Hashem, grant them the courage to be able to control themselves when they see me.
Because she wants them to see her.
That's right. Because she wants to get married.
Because she wouldn't have to make this plea to Hashem.
If she was hiding in her house.
That's right.
If she locked herself up in her house, she would not have to make this prayer.
Or not even come, pray at home.
That's right. She's davening because she doesn't want people to see her. She wants people to get married to her. But you created them to show you. So if tzaddikim see me, okay, fine. Tzaddikim see me and they want to marry me. I mean, good.
I'm all for it. Yeah.
I'm all for it. But you also created Rishayim. And this is the way you want it to be. Not Rishayim as in horrible people, but you created people who are capable of sinning. And this is likely the person I'm going to marry. So please, Hashem, let it not be with sin. Even though you made it this way.
But you said, sort of saying, I'm on treacherous ground here, but I need your help.
It's right, because it's you made it.
Keep it on the straight.
That's right.
For all parties involved.
That's right. So actually, in today's Tanya, you're talking about I need help. In today's Tanya, today's portion of Tanya, at the beginning of chapter 13, Alter Rebbe quotes the Gemoro elsewhere, which says that tzaddikim yetzer tov shoiftan, and beinanim zev zeh shoiftan. Tzaddikim is literally judged by the good inclination, the yetzer tov, and beinanim are judged by both yetzer tov and yetzer hara. So explains the Alter Rebbe. Well, the Alter Rebbe just finished saying that a beinani is someone who wants to sin but doesn't sin. So what do you mean it's judged by the yetzer hara? The yetzer hara doesn't get his way because the person doesn't sin. But the Alter Rebbe says, hold on a second, look at the language. It says the beinani is judged by the yetzer hara and the yetzer tov. Doesn't say controlled by the yetzer hara and yetzer tov, because the yetzer hara and the beinani has no control. It says its opinion, but then its opinion is quieted down, like three judges in a court. The yetzer hara says his opinion, I want sin. The yetzer tov says his opinion, no, we're not sinning. So where does halacha follow? The third judge. Who's the third judge? Hashem. So if I muster up the courage to bring my judge to say, no, I'm not sinning, so then there's the strength given from Hashem, the third judge, and that's how the ruling is. So there's an opinion of the yetzer hara which says I want to sin, but he's outnumbered by the yetzer tov which says no, we're not sinning, and God who joins the yetzer tov and says no, we're not sinning and we don't sin. So this is further to her prayer because Taka, this guy needs Hashem's help not to sin, because you created him, Rasha. You created him in such a way that he wants to sin, and he's going to need your help to outnumber the judge who says that we want to sin. So this is perhaps a way of a deeper understanding to her prayer and asking Hashem. And let's say if our reading is correct that she wants to get married, and if we're, as halacha is, a man is supposed to look at the girl before he marries her, it's actually the one halachic requirement is that he sees her before he marries her. He doesn't have to have a conversation with her. He has to see her, because if he doesn't want her, then it's going to be a sham of a marriage. He has to want her. right? So she wants people to see her, presumably. But she's asking Hashem, you made this, you made men. This is how you made people. That it's a very, like you said, it's very treacherous ground. And this future husband of mine is going to need your help, Hashem, that God forbid there's no sin come as a result of her. So this is perhaps a deeper understanding to her davening. Okay, so we'll stop over here, and God willing, tomorrow we're going to get into understanding who is the third category, right? The first category was the woman, the widow who runs around from neighbor to neighbor instead of going to shul, instead of going to the base medrash, I should say. Rabbi Yochanan's base medrash. Maybe looking for a spouse there. Maybe she's bouncing from neighbor to neighbor, yenting, hoping to get some attention that way. And as the Gemara is even worse, feigning piety when in reality she's not pious with sorcery. And then the woman who's over praying, and we're suggesting she's praying to get attention, as opposed to the woman of Yochanan saw who's praying for the contrary, to make sure that the attention she gets is appropriate attention.
Both of them, they want attention.
But one's appropriate, one's inappropriate.
Yeah.
So tomorrow, but the third category the Mishnah said was the child, the premature child. So who exactly is this premature child? That the Gemara will discuss tomorrow, talking about a scholar who prematurely thinks he's a scholar when he hasn't really earned his stripes yet. So we're going to learn about that, God willing, tomorrow.
She should pray Besitha.
Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
Speaking of stripes,